We make way for the Hall of Famer, Howie Long, joining us from Montana. I don't think you have a speed limit up there, do you, Howie, in Montana?
Yeah, they actually do. Years ago, they didn't. I think back to, golly, I don't know how many years ago it was now. We shot Broken Arrow in Lewistown, Montana, and that was probably about 8 hours from where we are in the northwest corner, and there was no speed limit. And I had a rental car, and unbeknownst to me, rental cars have a governor at about 95 miles an hour. So, but I mean, you're driving in Montana, and there's nothing for hours, and there was no speed limit. But since that time, they've implemented a speed limit.
And are you on the deck of your home there on the lake?
Yeah, I'm looking at the Mission Mountains and across Skidoo Bay right now, and it's beautiful. Got the grandkids here.
Oh, nice.
All's good.
Who is the second most famous person in your neighborhood?
Golly. Well, Todd Heap's down the road here a bit. Phil Jackson's over in Big Arm. There's a number of people. Yeah, a lot of people are up, and we're on Flathead Lake. Flathead Lake is bigger than Lake Tahoe. It's 28 miles long, 15 miles wide. The bougie lake is Whitefish. That's where the ski resort is, and it's kind of overrun. I mean, I can take my hands off the steering wheel of my boat and not hit anybody on the 5th of July. So it's real nice.
If Hard Knocks was around when you were with the Raiders,
no.
What would we have seen?
It'd be good Hard Knocks.
I'll bet.
Really good Hard Knocks. No, listen, it was a different time. It was certainly a different time and a different organization. The things that happen, and you never write that. You never write that book. It was a fascinating time. You go from Villanova, where there's a priest on every floor, to the Oakland Raider locker room. John Matuzak and Ted Hendricks and Matt Millen and, Jim Plunkett, Art Shell, Gene Upshaw, Cliff Branch. It was a remarkable place to be, and no one really got into the complex. I mean, we never had people at our practices, and there certainly was no media, and there weren't a lot of what you would call extra. It's kind of like going into New England. When you go to New England and Bill is kind enough to invite you into practice, you're standing on the sideline by yourself because there's no one else in the building. And there are no distractions. It's all about one thing. And that's what it was then. And certainly you don't have much of a choice. I mean, they paid $325 million in relocation fees. They've played 3 years in a row. They played a home game overseas. So at what point, with all that's going on there, with all the turnover, you've got a new GM, you've got a slew of new players. You're in your final year in Oakland. I understand it's a good story, and John is a very entertaining guy. So I'm sure it'll make for good television. But I think at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is winning football games. And I think John and Mike Mayock certainly feel that way.
We had Chris Sims on. We've had a couple of people on recently who say Aaron Donald is the best interior defensive lineman in history.
Yeah, he's getting there.
Who would be his competition? Because I'd still like to put Mean Joe Green up against anybody.
Totally different time, though, Dan. It's kind of like it's somewhat like comparing. Well, everything's bigger, stronger, faster.
Yes.
Okay. That Steelers offensive line averaged 252 pounds across the board, 260 maybe. Today's largest offensive line averaged 322. Hell, Mike Kyle's 6'7", 330. Everything is bigger, stronger, faster. The guy that played Joe's position is 330, 340 now. So the game is bigger, stronger, faster. Terry would throw, you'd have to check this, but there were some playoff games where he'd throw 22 passes.
That feels like that's on the high end, too.
Right. That's on the high end. So
yeah.
How do you compare? It's impossible to compare eras. Aaron Donald, to me, is, you're talking about interior defensive lineman. I'm saying he's in the conversation for the best football player in the NFL right now.
Okay, but do you think Brady is the best quarterback of all time?
Once again, what's the situation? For example, Joe Montana, San Francisco, 4 Super Bowls, undefeated in Super Bowls. What's the criteria? That offense, that team was innovative. It was surgical. You watch what New England did, what they did in the Super Bowl, what they did in Kansas City. They went back to. They can morph into it's game to game, quarter to quarter, half to half, series to series. They can change who they are, and they do it every year. And the team you see in weeks 1 through 5 doesn't look like the team you see in weeks 7 through 12, and then certainly into the playoffs.
But do you think he's the best quarterback? How about this? You have one game to win.
I think based on what the criteria is, winning Super Bowls, I think you have to say that.
Okay, but you have one game to win, and you can't take any of your former quarterbacks.
Right.
Who are you taking? One game to win.
Who's the coach?
John Madden's the coach.
Well, then you got a pretty good shot with a bunch of quarterbacks. I think John was an innovative guy, and that team was certainly in that offense was innovative. And we lost a great Raider, and in my mind, a Hall of Famer, and it's a shame that he didn't get the call.
Yeah, and I hope that next year, Howie, because if we're going to put in 20 new players with the 100th anniversary, I think Zach Thomas is a Hall of Famer. I think Cliff Branch is a Hall of Famer. Alan Faneca is a Hall of Famer. Steve Hutchinson's a Hall of Famer.
Go back and look up the number of AFC championship games, Super Bowls, and numbers. For example, when Cliff Branch, I think, came out of college, and I was listening to him. I was driving down the road in my truck, and I heard him on NFL radio. When he was at Colorado, I think he caught 12 balls his senior year. How different is the college game? How different is the pro game? I know one thing, and it's kind of the litmus test for great players. When you get in the on Monday and or Sunday night, whenever it is that you're putting together your game plan, who's the guy you have to stop?
Yeah. When
they break the huddle.
Yeah.
And how much of an adjustment do you have to make defensively to compensate for a guy who might be one of the 4 fastest people on the planet? And was that until he was, I think when he was 62, he could run a 4.5. No,
well,
I mean, really, Dan.
Well, I mentioned him and Bob Hayes were the first two guys.
Yes.
They were different. They stretched the defense, and you had a throw deep passing mentality. And I love Freddie Blitnikoff, but Cliff Branch was the guy you had to worry more about than Freddie Blitnikoff, in my opinion. And Freddie's a Hall of Famer.
Well, they're different players,
yes.
Dan. It's 2 different positions. It's like comparing a 1 to a 2 in basketball, or 4 to a 5. It's you just can't make that comparison. It's you're comparing, for example, you're judging defensive linemen. Let's go Richard Seymour, New England. Richard Seymour played in a defense that it's a selfless defense. It goes from a 3-4 to a 4-3. It's a 2-gap in most situations. You're playing the run. The defense is not about you. It's not about getting you in position to make great plays. It's getting the defense to do what's called for to win the football game. If Richard Seymour plays in a scheme that's more pin your ears back and attack, he's got 105 sacks. How do you judge a player? You have to judge a player by the scheme.
But do you think
3-4? Is it a 2-gap defense?
Is he a Hall of Famer?
I think he is.
Yeah.
I do, and I think that's going to happen soon enough. I mean, Ty Law, great player.
Yeah.
Great player. It's time that I think you're going to start to see some of those players. And I wrote down, you talk about Tom Brady. All the great quarterbacks we talk about, they were always partnered with a pretty consistent cast of players. I went back and looked at, and I forget the numbers, and I can get it to you. You look at the number of offensive, the number of tight ends, the number of wide receivers, the number of running backs, the number of coordinators that Tom Brady's had during this run that started with that win over the Rams in the Super Bowl. It's amazing.
Yeah. Interchangeable parts.
Yep.
Yeah. If you were a free agent, money was going to be the same, where would you want to play right now? You're in your prime.
I can't imagine playing anywhere else, Dan.
Okay, let's take Oakland out of it.
Boy, I'll tell you, I've grown to really like Chicago a lot. Great city. They love football. You win there, and golly, it's special. You think back to that '85 Bears team, and particularly in that defense, which you're guaranteed in that Buddy Ryan scheme, you're guaranteed at least a single block.
Didn't they knock out all your quarterbacks and Ray Guy was warming up?
They did. Ray Guy was warming up, and I'm not sure he was real committed to it. I think the right arm was a little bit. His guys were coming unblocked, knowing how to block that defense. That bare front, knowing how to block it.
See, I always think the Steel Curtain, that's the best defense I ever saw. But there was Doomsday. The Vikings were great. You guys were great. The Bears were unbelievable that year. The Ravens maybe, that was spread over a few years. Best defense ever. Can you come up with an answer for that?
Well, once again, it's the period of time.
Okay, what they did in their period.
Yeah, I'd say the Steelers. I think they won 4 in 6 years.
Yeah.
And were dominant, intimidating. And, when you look at the Bears, you look at us, I think, and I'm not comparing our defense to the Bears' defense. I think our defense for that 2-3 year stretch was really good. And certainly the performance in the Super Bowl, people forget that '83 Washington team had set a scoring record that stood until the Chris Carter Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah.
And they were, I'm watching them on film. I remember like it was yesterday. I'm watching them on film and I'm going, oh my God. They're just running. People are running through holes that are big enough to drive a truck through, and they're just picking people apart. We've got our two corners that, they didn't really need to get in the huddle. We had 2-3 coverages. That's it. We ran one blitz a game. And the one blitz we ran was a jet rip blue slash off the left side, backed up on 2nd and long, Joe Washington on a screen pass. They had killed us on it earlier in the year up in Washington, and what was turned out to be a dynamic game for both teams offensively. We didn't have Marcus Allen, and a number of players were injured, but we replaced Matt Millen with Jack Squirek. He spies Joe Washington. The rest is history. But for that Bears team and for our team, not winning the second title or the third is the thing that I think would be disappointing for both teams.
It's great to visit with you there in the offseason. I hope to catch up with you during the regular season. As always, my best to the family.
Partner.
Thank you, Howie. That's Howie Long, Raiders Hall of Famer.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune into Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV. Stream for free on BR Live or download the Dan Patrick Show app.